Welcome to Expanding Access, a podcast by Behavioral Health Tech, where we explore the cutting edge of mental health, substance use, and autism and IDD care. Each episode features insightful conversations with industry leaders who are driving real change through technology and innovation. Whether you're a provider, payer, or just passionate about expanding access to behavioral health care, you won't want to miss these stories. Let's dive in. Hello, everyone. I'm Solome Tibabu, your host for the Expanding Access podcast, and we've got another amazing guest today. So excited to have you, Davina. Thank you for being here. Well, let's just jump right into it. Can you tell our audience a little bit about yourself and your organization to get started?
Sure. Thank you, Solome, for having me on. So hi, everybody. My name is Davina Mena, and I am the Tribal Liaison for the Arizona Division of Problem Gambling. My background is actually in behavioral health and in community-based work. I've served in roles like case management, peer support, group support, program creation, program coordination. And most recently, before this position as a tribal liaison, I worked as a provisional therapist, specializing in the Latino, Latina, Latinx community trauma-informed care. So a lot of micro social work, which is a big shift now, considering that I'm the tribal liaison, which is more macro social work, but it's been great. And so this role is actually a statewide initiative by Governor Katie Hobbs to ensure that state agencies and state departments, divisions, before we implement a policy, we are taking into the highest consideration tribal initiatives and tribal needs.
Amazing. Thank you. Just to set the stage for our audience who might not be as familiar, can you talk about some of the most common misconceptions when it comes to problem gambling?
Sure. So I think a good way to kind of start that answer is by setting a foundation for what problem gambling is. So problem gambling is any gambling behavior, patterns or habits that are detrimental and cause harm and distress in individuals' lives. So when we talk about problem gambling, a lot of people, the misconception there is that it's a moral failing or that there's a lack of willpower, when honestly, if you look at it through a behavioral health standpoint, a behavioral health lens, you'll see that it's actually a diagnosable condition and that there is brain rewiring, there is hijacking of the brain's reward system, decision-making, impulse control. So if you put problem gambling and run a parallel with things like substance use or alcohol use, there's a lot of similarities there. But I think oftentimes because problem gambling doesn't have a lot of physical tells the way other addictions do, it kind of gets labeled as a lack of willpower.
But yeah, as you mentioned, this kind of addiction does affect individuals. Like, for example, can you talk about how it can affect individuals in the workplace environment for those who are struggling?
Yeah, definitely. So when you're looking at somebody who's dealing with problem gambling, the individual themselves is probably going to be experiencing high levels of stress, high levels of anxiety, high levels of depression. They might be distracted. They could be missing work or maybe even missing important family events. There's going to be a lot of financial strain there, financial pressure, and then difficulty concentrating. And I think the important thing to note here is that from that list, maybe one or two of those things you might be able to recognize if you're really observing a person or if you really know the person. But for the most part, a lot of that is just an internal experience. And so when you think about those big feelings like anxiety, depression, stress, and having all those things internalized, it causes the problem gambler to really mask and to really hide a lot. And that creates feelings of shame and isolation. And the thing is that problem gamblers are actually really high functioning. So it makes it even more difficult to spot it unless you really kind of know what you're looking for.
This is really a growing issue that we're seeing across our community and throughout PhD. What can families do and how can they be engaged?
So friends and family should be engaged through education and not so much blame, which I know is easier said than done. I think when we care about somebody deeply, we love somebody deeply, and we see them engaging in habits that are harmful to them, I think sometimes our first reaction is to kind of course correct, right? It's like, don't do that, do this, you're going to get better soon. And I get it, all of that is coming from a place of love. But in, reality, what we want to do is really try to understand what it is that individual is experiencing. Because once we can understand it, it leaves space for us to be able to differentiate between support and enabling. and learning how to set healthy boundaries and making sure that any support through friends and family is rooted in communication, accountability, and emotional wellness, and not so much like control or shame.
Oh, that is so important. And what about for individuals that are at risk? Do you have any steps that they should consider taking, maybe even proactively?
Yeah, so I think, to be honest, just be honest with yourself, like be real with yourself. Where are you at in the cycle of change? And sometimes for individuals, that means that they're just not ready. And that's okay, because even that level of awareness, it's a step. But if you are somebody who is ready and willing to kind of hear and create space for resources and supports, I would say first just start assessing your own gambling habits, right? So how much are you spending? How often are you at casinos, or how often are you engaging in like the sports betting apps, things like that? Setting financial safeguards, limiting access to gambling platforms. And a really important one is just being aware of your state's resources. So a simple web search, typing in the state you're in, and maybe adding problem gambling help can be a great place to start. Nationwide, the hotline is 1-800-GAMBLER. And if you're in the state of Arizona, the hotline is 1-800-NEXT-STEP. So just kind of being aware of your supports and resources.
And what about the provider community? What do you wish that the addiction treatment community, providers who are starting to see this issue more, what do you wish they knew or could take action on in regards to gambling addiction?
At the very top of my wish list is definitely screening. That is such a big one. I think it's so underutilized. There's problem gambling screeners that are like 3, maybe 4 questions long. It's very brief, but it's enough information that it creates a jump off point for any provider to kind of examine.
Thanks so much, Davina. This has been so informative. And if I could just ask you one more question, why should tribal communities in particular really be aware and take proactive measures when talking about problem gambling?
So if I were to be honest and be very vulnerable with this answer, I would say that tribal communities should feel a sense of responsibility to address problem gambling, because when we're talking about historical experiences and current economic realities, there's a lot of complexities there, and there are a lot of intersections there. Land-based venues like casinos, they really are a monumental structure to what tribal sovereignty is, right? There's a lot of great economic opportunity there. Casinos do amazing things for the communities that they serve. And we also have to recognize that there is potential harm there. And so I think that recognizing both of those truths is part of a larger conversation that does need to be had. But I think for the moment, just recognizing that these two things coexist, because they do, is when you really start to put your community first, and you start recognizing that when we talk about problem gambling, we're also talking about individual wellness and family stability and community wellness. And I think at the very end, we're also really considering how economic benefits in the future shouldn't have to come at the cost of a community.
I love that. So important. Thank you so much again for taking the time to share your experiences, personally, professionally, what you're seeing across your community and beyond with behavioral health tech. Such a pleasure to always talk with you, Davina. Thank you.
Thank you, Salome.
Thanks for tuning in to Expanding Access. We hope you're feeling inspired by today's discussion. If you've enjoyed the episode, subscribe and share it with your network. For more content and opportunities to get involved in transforming care, visit behavioralhealthtech.com. Until next time, let's keep pushing boundaries and expanding access together.